Good morning, everyone. I am in Geneva today. Sorry for not being there with you, but other commitments not allow me to travel to your meeting. But I'm happy to be here today, and I will need. If you don't mind, I would prefer to share my screen if this is possible. No, I cannot share the screen. Because I did a last, I would like to share myself the screen. Okay. In the meantime, I can introduce myself. My name is Sara Mazar. Thanks for the introduction. I am scientific officer in one of the research branches of WMO, which is the World Meteorological Organization. And our agency is the United Nations Agency for Climate, Weather, and Ocean. One of the most important activities in the organizations is related with climate change. We are hosting agency of the IPCC and co-founder, the IPCC Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. Exactly. If this is no, sorry, sharing is not turned on. Not at the moment. Now it's working. Thank you. Okay, I hope that you can see now my screen. And as I said, I am one of the officers in one of the research branches of WMO. We are in the Global Atmosphere Watch program, which is the program that is focusing on all issues related to atmospheric composition. And in this context, the local sensors are now playing a very important role in our discussions. Just briefly, because this afternoon I will introduce the Global Atmosphere Watch program for you. The Global Atmosphere Watch program is basically the research program at WMO that goes for advanced and enhanced science, services, and infrastructures related to atmospheric composition. And all our work is connected with global societal needs. And in air pollution, that there are many different, sorry, because I need to mute. Sorry, I will need to mute the translation because it's giving me some echo, but I cannot see now the translation. Okay, let's go. The Global Atmosphere Program is having a very important activity connected with research infrastructure. We are providing high quality and long-term observations to the users. And in this, you can see the distribution of the network at global scale. As you can see also, the network is measuring more than 200 parameters connected with atmospheric composition and supporting climate change assessment. And also, as you can see in the distribution of the map, there are some regions that are better covered than the others. And we can see that there are some important gaps in Asia, Africa, and South America. How we are working to cover these special gaps, we are trying to integrate other sources of information as modeling, satellites, national airport networks, but also local sensors. And what is a local? I think that you were discussing in the last days, and I don't want to go into details, but basically the most important part is that is the system that incorporates the detection, but all the components to acquire, process, and output the data. And in this context of the new technologies coming up and how these technologies can be used, WMO is promoting a collection of reports to support air quality management of stakeholders and to give them an idea about the technology and their application. This is one of the latest reports that was published in 2020, and it was endorsed by WHO, UNEP, IGAC, and MEP. The report reflects on the state of the art in terms of accuracy, reliability, and reproducibility of different sensors to be used for the atmospheric measurement of atmospheric composition. In this report, you will find solutions for air pollution gases as NO, NO2, ozone, CO, SO2, and other operational metrics like VOCs. Also incorporate some sections for greenhouse gases, long-lived greenhouse gas, like CO2 or methane, but also particulate matter, which is connected with your discussions on semantic. In this report, it analyzed all the benefits of limitations of the low-cost sensors. In the context of it, you can think on low-cost production. They are portable. You don't need a lot of energy to supply them. You can easily deploy. Also, it's a technology that is advancing very quickly, and also the consumption is very low. In limitations, on the other side, you can think in the high cost for their maintenance in terms of human resources, but also economical. Also, you were mentioning the low measurement precision, and also the large measurement errors that sometimes some of the parameters are associated. They are difficult to calibrate sometimes, and they have a limited lifetime. And this is one of the main recommendations of the report for manufacturers. We need more information on the sensor lifetime and degradation. And why? Because it's very important for an air quality management stakeholder to understand the lifetime of the instruments and then the different application areas. You can see in this graphic how are the scope of the lifetime of sensors for different applications. And the important is that the well-established reference network can supply information about trends. For example, that nowadays it's very important to complement information for associated to climate change, but the limited lifetime of the local sensors sometimes are not suitable for this kind of studies. And this is an example that we are promoting in Africa for PM inside these cruise projects that is really focusing in early warnings. Early warnings, scales of days or weeks. And what we are trying to see if these local sensors technology are suitable for supporting early warning associated to standard in Sahel. All the tests, we did a test of 3 different sensors, and all the tests were done in Tenerife, in Canary Islands, which is in front of Morocco coast. And here you will see some examples of the results for the 3 different types of sensors that we were testing. Purple line, the magenta line is the observation coming from the reference grade monitor. And then red, blue, and yellow are the local sensors tested. This is the image for low concentration events. And you can see that there are kind of agreement, even though there is some spread between the sensors, and it looks like some sensors are having a very low limit threshold. If you go to the high concentration episode, can see that some of these sensors are very good to detect the maximum peak. It's not the case of all of them. See, for example, the blue line here is very flat. And this is when you calibrate the results after calibrating with the reference grid sensors, the local sensors. You can see how better are now the agreement with the reference measurement, which is the pink color. But still, there are some sensors that will not be recommended for this kind of exercise. And this is the kind of things that we are trying to promote in the countries, in the environmental agencies, but also in the regions, how to use this information in a correct way, and what is the technologies that we have to promote on top of the others. The second set of reports promoted by WMO connected with local sensors is their applications. Here you can see that there are several application areas where local sensors are really a good tool for supporting air quality management strategies. And you can think in source and impact monitoring, emergency response. When there is a crisis, these sensors are very easy to deploy. Also to cover the monitoring gap, to do a hotspot in the identification for a specific situation, but also one of the most successful application areas is the social engagement. Why? Because the people can have in their houses these instruments and really rely about how is changing the levels of the air that they are breathing at home, but also outside. And what is the applications also that you can think in forecasting, in modeling? As you can see here, this is the example of the city of Oslo in Norway. It is a network of local sensors over the city. And in the left side, you can see the output of the model, only with no fusion technique, including the local sensors. You can see that it's very flat. The levels are not really distinguished between traffic concentrations and residential. But when you incorporate this data in your operational workflows, you can get what you see in the right part. You can see how you can increase, in agreement with observations, the levels of NO2 in this case, which is mostly associated with combustion, meaning traffic, residential, and industry. But also you can use it in evaluation. And here you can see the example of Copernicus. Copernicus is working at global scales. And as you can see here, we have different types of networks, regional networks, that not all the national air quality networks are open to the public. Then this is a limitation when you have these global systems, because we cannot use all this data for routinely evaluation of the model outputs. Or you can have a global network that is helping to cover the whole globe, but still there are some regions that needs to be supported by other information. And this is one of the things that some initiatives are trying to promote. This is the example of OpenIQ. I think that there is a presentation in the same session today. And here you can see how this platform is trying to integrate national and regional air quality networks, but also air sensor locations, meaning low cost. And the most important thing that you have to be aware when we think in networks is that can be a benefit for some low and middle income countries, as you can see here, but also we have to promote quality on the data provided by these instruments, and to be sure on the latency, quality, and the spatial representativity of these stations. And also the report incorporates some examples of your country, Kazakhstan. As you can see here, there are some study cases where you can check the benefits of the use of local sensors for promoting awareness on air pollution, and potentially to get the government pushing on how important it is to establish a quality network, monitoring network in the countries, and to stress the strategy behind this, the network design. And with that, just I want to thank all of you for listening to me today, and I'm welcome to answer any question.
Good morning. So I'm waiting for my slides, right? I can okay. All right. Can you all hear me? Okay. Right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving me this podium. So my name is Dhawal Shah. I'm a faculty member at Nazarbayev University, and continuing the very nice presentation which Sarah presented. So I'm also going to talk about basically creating a network of low-cost sensors. Now, this has always been a question, especially with the government agencies, like how do we trust the data coming from the low-cost sensors? So I hope I can answer some of these questions today. Can we go on to the next slide? So before we go on, so I would like to introduce the project that we have. This project is funded by Department of State, and it's entitled Building Capacity to Improve the Air Quality in Central Asia. And we have a project team from Duke University, so we are using their expertise, and we have teams in each of the Central Asian countries, with Green in Kyrgyzstan, Temi in Uzbekistan, and Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan. The idea of the project is that we are trying to create a network of outdoor and indoor sensors put down together. So we have blue sky sensors, the one on the right side, which measures the outdoor pollution levels. And then the indoor ones is called as an air assure on the left side. And we are doing it across the 3 nations. And beyond that, we are also going into data analysis just to make sure that we have the accuracy of the data and developing tools to present the data in a nice way. So can we please move on to the next slide? Okay. So the map in the center basically shows the network of sensors that we have here. The project is an extension from South Asian countries. So we already have a network working in India, Nepal, Pakistan, and now we are extending to Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. Each of the team is working in their own countries. So we are working with governmental organizations, with public schools, with private citizens, community centers. Particularly like in Astana, we had limited sensors available. So now, as you can see, we are working with schools of Astana. And why particularly schools? Because it's much easier. Like there's a question on how to maintain the sensors for a longer period of time. We need regular calibrations, regular check whether the sensors are working or not. So working with high school students makes our life a bit easier, and they are very much interested to learn how the sensors work, and we can train them to maintain the sensors over a longer period of time. And we basically leave the choice to the host whether they want the data to be public or private, specifically because the indoor air kind of is a very private thing, and people can know about your lifestyles based on the data. So we leave the choice to the host whether they want to keep it as a public data or a private data. So can we please move on to the next one? So indoor air quality at the same time is also very important to monitor these days, and it basically can tell you about ventilations in your houses, in schools. Considering the Central Asian countries where winters are pretty harsh, coming from Astana, we have a rule that winter 6 months we are not supposed to open up the windows. But these sensors can tell you how good the ventilations are in your room, and sometimes it might be necessary to have good ventilation. And then basically the outside PM can also infiltrate into the indoor atmosphere. So this is an example at the bottom. The blue line is from the outdoor sensors and the pink line is from the indoor sensors. And as you can see, especially when you have high PM zones, these the outdoors can come to indoors, and we see at the same time a higher peak. Typically, it takes about 15 minutes depending on the house that you have. And in the large schools, we have seen it can take up to 30 minutes to come indoors. Now, having this idea can be very helpful for people to understand whether they would like to have windows open or closed. And we have been working with our particular host in Almaty, where this was the specific question they asked, whether to leave the doors open or not. So now we tell them the outdoor sensors data, and based on that, they decide what to do. So can we please move on to the next one? So why particularly low-cost sensors? So again, I would like to thank all the hydromet agencies. They have been very open to share the data that they have, and they are providing excellent data from their reference monitors. But these reference monitors are usually very expensive, and they cannot provide all the needs. Okay, pollution sources can be very localized, hyper localized pollution sources. And when we publish the data for the city of Almaty, let's say, people don't trust whether it is the data for their own locality or is it generalized for some other parts of Almaty. So having a low-cost sensors can actually supplement the governmental organizations. So it's not going to replace, but supplement, provide them some extra data. It can help them to prioritize the resource allocations, because often we have budget constraints. And it can target some pollution mitigation strategies specifically in the local zones. Once again, if we see any sort of elevated sensors reading, although okay, the data may be off by 5%, 10%, in some cases 20%, but still it means it is high. So using those kind of things can at least raise awareness amongst people to take some decisions accordingly. So can we move on to the next one, please? So as Sarah mentioned, when we get all these sensors, although the TSI's company said they are all calibrated. So what we did is we actually put down all the sensors together. And at the bottom, this is what we see. So they have some variations in their readings. It can be off at times by 20%, 30%. But the idea is they all correlate with each other very nicely. And there is an option for us to put down correction factors, calibration factors into them. So that's what we do. When we received all these sensors from the Department of State, we actually put down all the sensors together. So on the bottom left, you see the picture. And then using data analysis, we actually inserted calibration factors into these sensors to make sure all these sensors will now show the same values under different conditions. These calibration factors depend on atmospheric conditions. They depend on relative humidities, especially when it's rainy or snowy, the calibrations can be off. But using our expertise of work with the previous experiments, now we know how to insert these calibration factors under different atmospheric conditions as well. Can we move on to the next one? So, oops. So post calibrations, all the sensors, they show the same data. They can be further calibrated using the standard monitors which the governmental agencies, hydrometers are using. It can be gravimetric method, it can be HORIBA, it can be BAM, or whatever is needed. And again, these calibrations needs to be done every year, we believe, but we still are looking into the data to see when actually does the sensor part goes, like it degrades. So again, using data analysis, we can actually check if the data is degrading over time. We will know that they need a recalibration again. The good thing is these sensors are cheap. They are very robust. They can work in extreme conditions, easy for people to install. And using certain factors, they can be made accurate to the needs of the people. Next one. So beyond installing the sensors, we are collecting all the data and we are trying to process the data. So as yesterday, there were questions asked that sometimes we get negative data from the sensors. So as the nature of the sensors are, it can go off under certain conditions. Maybe some dust is stuck into that. And because of that, we are doing a detailed data analysis tools to filter out any sort of wrong data in the system. So the first check that we do is basically trying to understand how, what is the uptime of these sensors, were the sensors working during that period or not. So within 2 weeks, if the sensor has been off for more than 25%, we basically reject the data saying that, okay, it was off, let's not consider the data from that. We are doing averaging over time. We are creating trends to figure out, we are analyzing the trends to figure out if the data exceeds certain values, it may be wrong. Then we may need to go back to the sensor, check if everything is okay or not. And we are basically preparing all sorts of temporal special graphs for public to see. All this data is currently available to public using tsilink.com. Moving on, just to give you some example, on to the next slide. I think we missed something. Okay. So this is the most recent, So this is the most recent data from Kyrgyzstan team. This is from 29th August to 15th September, and it gives you from all their sensors what was the PM values, and it typically varied between 100 and in some cases it was very low, about 1, depending on the location of the sensors. The relative humidity and temperature fluctuation, of course, day and night time. And this is all rough data right now. It has not been processed, but it gives you an idea about the air quality in the country. Next slide. Okay. The same thing for Kazakhstan, but this time I'm showing you the indoor air quality data. Now, indoor air quality data gives me PM 2.5, and it also gives me the gas concentrations like CO2. On the top, we see the red line, which kind of goes up every week. And the sensor belongs to church. So we realized that because of the Sunday prayers, the values were going very high. So we recommended the person in the church to make sure they have good ventilation, especially on Sundays. On the bottom side, we see a very high CO2 values coming up to 8,000. This was an individual's home, a single studio apartment. And he was basically keeping the windows closed. So we recommended him, it's not good to stay, keep the windows closed and stay there forever. So basically have some ventilations in that idea. So it's a recommendation. So the concept is that based on this data from local sensors, we can actually give some advice to local people around and how to make some changes into their places. Moving on to the next one. So the data from the local sensors can be used to make certain key decisions. What exactly is, we leave up to the host, but with the support of government, we can make some changes. As a citizen science tool, the sensors can be used to gather local data to make changes to individuals' lifestyles. We are creating education programs and resources, especially amongst young generations, working with high schools to train them to make sure that they are aware of the issues coming up. And I would like to acknowledge the support from Duke University to Department of States to basically provide us this support for the project, and of course conference organizers to give me this podium. So thank you very much.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me? Excellent, thank you. So, good morning. I will be going through Airban's trial in the Kyrgyz Republic of mobile monitoring to measure pollution spatially as well as temporally using low-cost mobile sensors. So let's proceed to the next slide. Our mission is to tackle problems in the world through data. And air pollution is clearly something that needs to be tackled with a large amount of data because existing solutions do not take into account sufficient data, and reference monitors cannot provide the level of data that is needed, as has been covered by other participants in the session. So we have developed an approach to use mobile monitoring to provide the gaps in data for air pollution. And this approach was trialed earlier this year in Bishkek. So move on, please. We chose to focus on particulate matter pollution. The reason behind this is that in Bishkek, PM 2.5 and PM 10 pollution has been very high previously, and it is exacerbated by conditions during the winter, as well as residential heating emissions. It is very cyclical, and it is very spatially dependent. We thought that mobile monitoring for PM 2.5 specifically would be particularly effective and help bring about new policy and policy changes in order to improve the pollution situation as quickly as possible. Mobile monitoring, next slide, please. Mobile monitoring uses a number of approaches and has a number of benefits over individual static sensors. First of all, the mobile sensors, which are mounted on vehicles that travel around the city, and they're mounted on vehicles that travel around the city already, such as buses, taxis, etc. It costs less to set this up than a traditional static sensor, because it costs less per spatial unit, because each sensor is able to provide information across the entire city and across a route that it travels on, rather than just a single area that it is mounted on. And the maintenance costs are lower because sensors can be calibrated on assets directly, on these moving assets directly, and they can also be easily swapped out to maintain coverage of an area, even if sensors have gone down or need to be recalibrated more thoroughly. And overall, this calibration means that the sensors have a higher uptime and a higher accuracy overall. There are a number of challenges with mobile monitoring, however, and that is, first of all, that they must use low-cost sensors due to the fact that they due to the fact that reference sensors need to be large and mounted on specific, and need to be under very specific conditions. And because a large fleet of mobile monitors needs to be deployed to a city to cover it effectively, it would not be practical to have expensive reference grade sensors traveling. As a result, it is important to make sure that the data that comes out of this is trustworthy and useful. And this was the goal, or one of the goals, of our trial. If we move on, please. We need to assess the feasibility, cost, and reliability of mobile sensor to understand, are the sensors accurate enough for further usage? Can we cover the area both spatially and temporally? And how expensive is it to deploy, manage, and maintain these sensors across a city? Finally, we wanted to understand what the insights can be provided from the data that is collected. Next slide, please. To do this, we set up a trial hoping to use 5 of our dynamic monitor V2 for monitoring in Bishkek across a few months. The sensing element in this is an optical particle counter, which is not the most reliable and accurate compared to reference sensors. However, is a good measure of PM 2.5, especially in terms of background emissions and understanding the general landscape there. You can see on these images, there are some of our sensors. We were hoping to power them using solar panels. However, this proved to be impossible, and we remounted them with the help of the team at Move Green, who worked with us on this trial. In the end, the trial proceeded with 3 sensors, and we got very good results that we are really happy with. If we move on, please. We used these 2 microbus routes across the city. With just 2 routes, we cover a huge part of the city, from the north to the south and from the east to the west. This shows the main draw of mobile monitoring, because we're able to cover multiple areas and many different zones of pollution with just these 2 routes. The sensors were deployed across a number of days. Around 2 to 3 weeks of data in total were collected, and these were then analyzed by our team, and a full report was provided. So I will briefly go over the results of this analysis. If we move on, please. First of all, on the data coverage, this is to understand how much spatial area are we able to actually cover using these sensors. We found that the data was able to cover large parts of the city with even a small number of active sensors. Around 20 to 30% of the area within city limits. On the right, you can see that's marked in the red dot, was within about 500 meters of a sensor daily, and 5% of the city was within 500 meters of a sensor hourly. This is with only 2 active sensors, and so we would like to test further to see how 5 to 10 sensors would cover the city, because we believe with a mix of different vehicles, not just buses, but also taxis and others, as well as more sensors, this would cover a large part of the city within, and allow most of the city to be within close proximity to a sensor at much of the day. This would provide a huge amount of data that would be very useful and most importantly, like mentioned in the previous presentation, it's personal to people that are living nearby these areas. Next slide, please. The next step is to understand the confidence that we have in this data. As I mentioned, optical particle counters are not known as the leading edge of reliability, and there are other methods of sensing that are used for reference sensors. To make sure that we can make policy decisions based off this data, it is important to be happy in the level of calibration that we can provide, especially given that the data is measured from a moving vehicle rather than from a static area. So we compared the data to background averages, and daily readings at different monitoring stations. We used AQCA to obtain the monitoring readings from background reference stations, and we are very happy with how it matched across the multiple days of trial. For example, between the 20th of January and the 27th of January, the area in central Bishkek saw an increase in pollution, which was marked by especially an increase in PM 2.5. We believe that this was caused by an increase in the use of heating, because we could see that the temperature during this time especially had decreased. Our sensors caught that very well, and the increase was almost exactly the increase from the reference monitoring station. In addition, the reference monitoring station provided daily averages, and we were able to see this breakdown in more detail, not only just hourly, but also across different streets. We could see each individual street and how the pollution changed there over time, and not just how the pollution was changing at a single location. Next slide, please. So the next step is to look into the specific, to compare it to a specific reference station in detail. In this graph, we compare the performance of our dynamic sensors to the OSH market reference sensor, where the data was provided by Move Green. Now, because our sensors are moving around, to make this comparison, what we actually do is put together all the data that is within a certain distance of the reference monitor. Because of this, there can be small discrepancies given that it may still be a few hundred meters away. Here's a period of the trial period, and in green, you can see our dynamic sensor readings, and in blue, you can see the reference sensor readings. There's very good agreement, and you can see the difference in trends from the dynamic and reference sensor. So, for example, on the 23rd of January, there is a spike of pollution, which by the 25th decreases, and those trends are captured by both sensors. On the 28th and 29th, the reference sensor was actually missing data, and we were able to capture the trends anyway, which was in line with the background data that was available from other reference sensors. So we remain confident in this data. And when the reference sensor comes back online on the 31st, you can see that the agreement there is still very good. So the results are very positive, with an average difference of only about 12.5%. And we believe that in the time since this trial, we have also improved our calibration algorithms and our data analysis algorithms to provide even more accurate data. Next slide, please. So, like I mentioned, this data was gathered by selecting records within 1 kilometers of this reference monitor. However, even within this distance, we could see individual spatial trends and the changes from street to street, which is extremely useful. And on this image in the back here, you can see 1 day of pollution overlaid on a map of Bishkek. We can see that the overall levels of pollution, with Dhaka being higher, matches the background from WHO sensors. And all the way at the bottom, you can see the different the difference that there is from street to street, which is not something that is highlighted by these existing sensors at the level of detail that we can provide. So we recommend that more trials need to be done before mobile monitoring can be fully considered as an effective method of monitoring, in order to ensure the reliability and ensure the data coverage. We obviously suffered some technical setbacks during our trials, and so further testing would like to involve more sensors that hopefully are more focused around being near reference sensors, and all of that will, and across more routes in a city like Bishkek. All of that should be able to cover more ground and provide more data that can be analyzed to confirm the accuracy of the sensors in relation to the reference sensors. However, our early results were very promising, and we're very happy to endorse mobile monitoring for future testing. Next slide, please. Finally, one of the key issues with mobile monitoring to date has been the relatively large sensors and the fact that large buses may be needed, or in general, the difficulty with monitoring using larger sensors that need to move around. As so, we have focused on developing a sensor that is as small as possible. The sensor that we trialed was about 30 centimeters wide and suitable for larger vehicles, but there are vehicles that travel across a city at at eye level effectively, and that is bicycles and small micromobility vehicles like scooters. We've designed a sensor that will hopefully be effective on these vehicles as well, and we're very keen to trial that. We expect the accuracy to be slightly lower than the larger sensor. However, the idea is to make up for this lower accuracy through a constant calibration between this network of sensors, and to use just a larger amount of data in order to provide good averages and good indications of trends, even if the individual sensors have less accuracy and less reliability. That, if we move on to the next slide, that is a summary of our performance during the trial. We published a full report on the trial with in-depth review of the data and the results, and I'd be happy to talk to anyone about that as needed. Thank you very much.
Мгм. Звука нет, да? Спасибо большое за презентацию. Действительно, технологии развиваются, очень много инновационных подходов, и я вот думаю, за ними будущее, да, то есть они позволяют нам, людям, обычным гражданам, получать больше информации о качестве воздуха и улучшать свое здоровье тем самым. Уважаемые участники, у нас осталось, к сожалению, не так много времени для сессии вопросов и ответов. По программе мы
Модератор,
в 11:10 должны были перейти на кофе-брейк. Да, но у нас, да, если у нас вопросы, если есть, давайте, вы можете их задать нашим уважаемым спикерам для уточнения по их презентациям. Также я вот сейчас посмотрю, есть ли у нас вопросы в чате. В чате у нас вопросов нет от онлайн-участников. Был один, и Даваль на него уже ответил. Здесь у нас коммуникация идет. Есть ли вопросы, уточняющие на презентации наших участников, от участников, которые находятся здесь на конференции? Да, пожалуйста. Да, пожалуйста. Угу. Очень коротко, пожалуйста, ладно?
Конечно, спасибо. Мне интересно, есть ли здесь насколько хорошо справляются такие датчики в городах с очень загруженным трафиком, таким как Алматы-Бишкек, где загрязнение воздуха очень может сильно быть подвержено влиянию именно на дороге от какой-нибудь отдельной машины. В Алматы очень сильная вариативность внутри суток. И да, то есть как справляться с мониторингом мобильными датчиками в городах с загруженным трафиком, где может вариация очень сильно отличаться от очень большого количества факторов.
Антон, вы еще онлайн, я надеюсь? Просто у нашего докладчика большая временная разница. Кажется, к сожалению, его нет. Вот, я думаю, что этот вопрос можно будет, мы можем вас связать с Антоном Федотовым или с господином из Перу, нашим докладчиком из Перу, и они вам ответят на данный вопрос. Хорошо, я поделюсь контактами.
У меня есть небольшой комментарий
пожалуйста.
по этому поводу. Рафкат, спасибо за вопрос. И на самом деле, я думаю, что и нашим государственным органам, и гидрометам тоже интересно было бы наблюдать за этим процессом, который сейчас очень бурно развивается. Это именно мобильные датчики, очень инновационный, да, подход. Очень много нужно учитывать для того, чтобы получить релевантные данные. Это, конечно, загруженность дорог, маршруты, время года, даже время суток. Но там есть интересные инструменты, когда мобильный датчик устанавливают на общественный транспорт или даже на такси, и параллельно ведется видеотрансляция, чтобы смотреть вот эту корреляцию. Если вот высокий показатель именно на этом участке, можно по видео и по фото посмотреть, что именно находится вокруг, и таким образом работать над источниками. Много технических моментов, которые нужно учитывать. Это бесперебойная связь интернета должна быть, доступ к электричеству, чтобы было там не меньше 19 часов из суток, да, из 24, и не меньше, чем 25 дней, там, скажем, в течение там, месяца работал, да, если это вот более долгосрочные исследования. Но много таких вот технических вещей. Плюс очень часто бывает такое, что там впереди машина, которая едет впереди, да, что именно это за машина, какое топливо она использует, да, то есть вот такие вещи. Тем не менее, данные, которые мы получаем, они очень интересные, потому что все направлено на то, что люди дышат этим воздухом даже на дорогах. Да? И это самый важный момент. То есть водители открывают окно, дети в машинах едут, открывают окно, и они дышат этим воздухом. Ведь вопрос в этом, то есть какой вопрос мы задаем для того, чтобы получить, когда мы проводим такого рода исследования. Спасибо.
Хорошо,
Спасибо.
Джара, спасибо вам большое за ваш комментарий. Если нет вопросов, тогда позвольте, пожалуйста, поблагодарить наших онлайн-спикеров, наших докладчиков, которые презентовали свои доклады вживую, и пригласить всех участников, офлайн-участников на кофе-брейк, который начнется сейчас, и мы возвращаемся в зал в 11:30 без опозданий, большая просьба, потому что затем нас ждет следующая сессия номер 6. Спасибо всем большое. Онлайн-участникам подключаемся в 11:30.